Hello, and welcome back to the Masonic Roundtable, a weekly hangout where Masons from around the world get together to talk about Masonic news and opinions in a friendly and social manner. The thoughts and opinions expressed here are solely the opinions of the participants and do not represent any Grand Lodge statements or positions. Make sure you keep your conversations open for the public and on the level. To interact with us, send questions or comments to our Twitter page at Mason Roundtable or on the Facebook event page. As usual, my name is John Ruark, and I am a past master of the Patriot Lodge number 1957 in Fairfax, Virginia. And I will hand it off to Juan.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Juan Sepulveda. I am a member of Orange Blossom Lodge number 80 in Kissimmee, Florida, and the host of the Winding Stairs Freemasonry podcast.
Okay, Jason?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jason Richards, and I am the Junior Warden of Acacia Lodge number 16 in good old Clifton, Virginia.
Okay, and our special guest for tonight is Brother Eric Diamond. Eric, introduce yourself and your lodge and anything else you'd like to say.
Sure, I'm Eric Diamond, past master of Oriental Lodge number 33 in Chicago, and host of the X-Oriente Masonic podcast.
Excellent. Okay. I think we are light on Masonic news tonight, so Jason, if you will, take us away with the MMQOT, which is what?
All right. It is the Masonic Monday question on Tuesday. So last week's question was about some of the symbols that get brought up during some of the degrees of Masonry, specifically the anchor and the ark. The question was, two of the emblems of the third degree are the ark and anchor, and are described as being emblematical of a well-grounded hope and a well-spent life. It's most obvious to us where the symbol of the ark comes from, but not so much the anchor. One famed Masonic scholar posited its source came from Scripture. Your question is, who was the scholar, and from what biblical passage did he posit its origin? And we had a number of winners who were TMR listeners. First and foremost, there was Jason Richards of Acacia Lodge number 16. Never heard of the guy. We have Tim Bryce from Grand Lodge of Florida, Doug Russell. We also have Ken Pineo, William Neer, Christopher Corteau, Kevin Schwartz, Richard Zarth, Lou Bedford, and Jonathan Primo. All got that one right. So congratulations, guys. The answer was Albert Mackey. And he mentions in his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry that the anchor was related to Hebrews 6, or chapter 6, verse 19, which states, "Which hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast." So congratulations to everybody who got that right last week. Your Masonic Monday question on Tuesday for this week, the week of February 16th, is, out of all the purported George Washington aprons, two are best known. The first is the Lafayette apron, supposedly sewn by Lafayette's wife. The second apron is less well known. Whereas the designs on the Lafayette apron included the beehive and the Mark Master's circle and its mystic letters, the apron of this question was far less ornate, with an American and French flag as the central design. Your question: what was this apron, and what were the names of the Masons who gave it to Washington? So when you get the answer, send it to masonicmonday@gmail.com. Don't forget to include your lodge name and number. Again, don't put it on the Facebook page. And don't send it to the Masonic Roundtable at gmail.com, because this is Nick's endeavor, and he's the one who handles that when he's here. So if you have any other questions, again, send them to Masonic Monday, and we're looking forward to getting all your responses back. That'll do us, John.
Excellent. Guys, keep up the good work. I'm learning a lot through all these Masonic questions, so keep up the good work for contributing back. Now, on to our topic for tonight, one that I'm very curious and learning more about, which is the Kabbalah. Now, quickly, as you study more into Freemasonry, you'll certainly stumble across web pages and other sites that may reference into the Kabbalah. Also, other appendant bodies have taken the structure of the Kabbalah and extended them. And so I think it's worth covering what the principles of the Kabbalah are, what is the Kabbalah, and then how it relates to Freemasonry. And I think a friend and brother who definitely is more versed than I to talk about that is Brother Eric Diamond. And so I'll lead off the questions tonight with, what is the Kabbalah?
So the Kabbalah is basically, the word Kabbalah means to receive, or the reception, and what it is the mystical part of Judaism, and it is the another way to describe it is it's Neoplatonism merged with sort of Jewish mystical thought. And there's really, when you talk about Kabbalah, there's really three different kinds of Kabbalah. There is what we call the Maaseh Breshit, which means the path or the work of creation. There is the Maaseh Merkavah, which is the path of the work of the chariot. And then there's the Maaseh Shmot, which is the work of the names. And they're very, very different in their purpose and in their activities and their disciplines. So the work of creation is about understanding how creation, sort of like in those few moments when in Scripture we're told God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. There's all these things were happening that sort of created the structure of how man and the divine relate to each other, and that's really what the Maaseh Breshit, or the work of the creation, deal with. The Maaseh Merkavah, which is the work of the chariot, is really a mystical practice that helps an individual become closer to the divine. So it's really kind of more of a meditative practice. And then the third part is Maaseh Shmot, which is the work of the names, which is essentially like, some people call it the practical Kabbalah, which is amulets and like using the different forms of God's name to affect in some way the physical world. And so there are three very, very different paths. They have very different practices, and but we tend to kind of lump them all together in what we call the practice of Kabbalah.
Is that something that people would be going through in a specific order if they were to start studying Kabbalah, or is that something that they choose separate from each other, or how does that work?
Typically, Kabbalah is part of an overall study of Scripture. And there are different the way in which you would study Scripture as a Jew is sort of a four-part process, and there are four vehicles that help you understand the intent of God. So God reveals, in Judaism, God reveals His will through the Torah, right? And there's sort of four levels of study. There's the literal meaning, the allegorical meaning, the interpreted meaning, and then the hidden or mystical meaning. And those four things are in the Kabbalah study. They form an acronym in Hebrew called Pardes, which literally means orchard. It's also the meaning of the word garden. So when we talk about paradise, the word paradise comes from the word Pardes. And so Pardes means Peshat, which is the literal meaning of the text. There's Remez, which is the allegorical meaning. There's Drash, which is the interpreted meaning. And then there's Sod, which is the hidden meaning. And together those four consonants, because Hebrew, remember, has no vowels, those four consonants spell out Pardes. In the terms of the books, right, the Torah is the literal meaning of the text. The Mishnah is the allegorical meaning of the text. The Talmud is the interpreted meaning of the text. And then the Kabbalah is the hidden or mystical meaning of the text. And so that's kind of how it sets in there. as far as the study of it goes, the Ma'aseh Breshit, the first part, the part about creation, is sort of the intellectual part of the Kabbalah. The second part, the part about the work of the chariot, is the experiential part of the Kabbalah, and then the third part, the Shemot, the Ma'aseh Shemot, is the more practical part of the Kabbalah. And I would say when you're beginning to study it, typically you start with Ma'aseh Breshit because you have to understand the basic concepts, and then you start very carefully to go into Ma'aseh Merkavah, the second part, and then only when you're in a really advanced state would you ever get to Ma'aseh Shemot. By the time you get to Ma'aseh Shemot, that third part, the idea is that you've already reached a level where there's some sort of divine grace that's been bestowed upon you, so you know how to manipulate those names in such a way that it can affect the physical plane. Now, keep in mind, magic is forbidden in the Torah, so this is sort of a way around that, right? By having the Ma'aseh Shemot, you're really just using God's name as a way to affect reality. You're not using magic, and so this is sort of a way for the rabbis to be able to have some influence over in their world on the physical plane without actually resorting to something that was forbidden in the Torah.
So let me ask a thing about Neoplatonism. You alluded to that earlier. So is the intent of the system of Kabbalah to have a oneness with the Creator, or approach the blessings and receivings of the Creator? Is that the intent?
In the first part of Kabbalah, in the work of the creation, it's to really understand the nature of the divine. So, like, one of the things that's always mystified the rabbis and pretty much everybody who reads the Bible, I think, in any critical way, is why is it that God is sometimes he's kind of petulant, and sometimes he's wrathful, and sometimes he's merciful and loving, and sometimes he's sympathetic, and other times he's just completely unsympathetic. It's not really it doesn't really jibe, right? And even God seems to put limitations on his own power and his own agency and his own ability to work. And so what the Kabbalists were doing was they were looking for a way to explain this, a way to unify this. And so within the system of Kabbalah, it really does explain why there are times when God can be very wrathful, and then there are times when God can be very merciful. And by looking at the sort of the tree of life in that structure, it's a metaphor that describes what is essentially something that's unknowable.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be my next question: is what is the tree of life, and how does it relate to the Kabbalah?
So the tree of life is a metaphor, and one of the things that they teach you very early on when you start is that all of this stuff is a metaphor. We cannot understand the true nature of God as humans. In fact, there's this great scene in the Bible, in Exodus, when God actually utters the Ten Commandments to the children of Israel, and the children of Israel basically tell Moses, "Look, Moses, you need to go up on the mountain and get all this. Whatever God wants us to do, we'll do it. But you got to go and get the information, because we can't hear His voice and live. We cannot see His face. We will die." So what that means is that we're not able to really comprehend the totality of God. It's not physically possible for humanity. So what we've done is we've created these metaphors, these ways of understanding the divine by kind of compartmentalizing them, and the tree of life is just really one. I mean, there's all kinds of. In fact, there's like a head, there's a body. There's the tree of life. There's a diagram of concentric circles, which are the vessels of light. There's all kinds of different ways to visualize this. The tree of life is just one of them, and it happens to be the one that's the most well known.
I like how you say that it is an attempt to know the unknowable. It's a way that I describe when I'm trying to talk to someone about how come there's so many different religions and people can be so passionate about their search for light in their own respective culture. How is it possible? How can they be so confident that what they believe is the truth when I am so confident that what I believe is the truth? And I try to tell people, the way I look at it is like we're all trying to find a way to explain it that makes sense to each one of us in each respective culture, but we're trying to explain something that we just can't wrap our heads around. It's something that's so greater than us that we need to find these allegories and these symbols in order for us to try to get an approximation of what it could be, you know? So, you know, as long as you are, I follow up by saying, as long as you're focusing on whatever your religious teaching is, try to find what's actionable in it and try to apply that to your life. You know, try to get to that actual application of the wisdom in that light. Then, you know, that should be our focus. So it kind of alludes to that of the three different versions of the three different routes of Kabbalah. The one that's a practical one. Is it practical in that sense, as in the application of the lessons in the light?
I would say the Ma'aseh Shemot is really it's a critic would say it's the magical side of Kabbalah. So it's amulets, it's talismans, it's writing sigils, and there's like a 42-letter name of God, there's a 72-letter name of God, there's a 3-letter name of God, there's all of these different, and a lot of them kind of allude to parts of the temple ritual or their acrostics of prayers and things like that. I personally I don't find very much use for it. It's kind of interesting in a historical context, but I don't really find any great insight in that part of the Kabbalah. The second part of the Kabbalah is it's very intense and it requires a lot of discipline and a lot of work. And so I don't pursue that. I find the most insight comes from the first part of the Kabbalah, which is the part about creation. Because for me, the way in which, if you sort of deconstruct and you look at the tree of life, it really is a model for the creative process, right? So, like one of the big mysteries in the Bible is God creates man in His image, right? He says, "Let us create man in the human." He says, "Let us create the human in our own image." And what is that image, right? Of a God that is completely unknowable and doesn't, you can't like render God in some painting, or even though people have tried, that's really not God. So what is the image of God? Well, the image of man. If the image of man is made in the image of God, what is the image of God? Well, the image of God is that of a creator, right? That's the image of God. And so we as humans are the only animal that's creative. We have a need, a desire, a drive to create, right? And so that's that special divinity that has been bestowed upon us. And so by understanding the Kabbalah and that creative process that happened at the creation of the world, it's almost like a physics. It's almost like a way that we can understand our own creative process and our own creative impulse. And that I've found incredibly useful, especially in my work as a designer.
Okay, so then that's a good break point to then shift into how Kabbalah relates to Freemasonry. I guess we can start abstract and really think about, I guess, the philosophical principles and moral teachings that go along with that before we go into any sort of parallels to any other deeper side.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the appeal is that you alluded to from Freemasonry taking pieces of the Kabbalic structure?
I find it really interesting. It's like so much of Freemasonry is tied up with this analogy of the temple and what the temple meant. And when you look at the sort of the Jewish sources around what was written about the temple, there's like an entire volume of the Talmud that is just basically devoted to, how many cubits was this hallway and how many, measures was that, table or etc. And all of those things had mystical meanings attached to them. So, for example, when you talk about the pillars, right, that were outside the temple, the outer door of the temple, those have very deep Kabbalistic significance, and they have Masonic significance, right? So I think it's natural that we look at this very rich system of allegory that is the Kabbalah, and we find Masonic parallels to it, because I think that the guys who are developing Masonry, when these rituals were being sort of formed and conceived of, I think that they were very cognizant of the Kabbalah, and they use it as a source material.
Yeah, I've definitely said that before in earlier episodes, that when you look at the influence of Hermeticism, Kabbalah, alchemy, and other kind of mystic philosophies and Western philosophies, that they all dovetail into the ritual that we have today, and there's too many similarities. It's really hard to prove, but there's too many similarities to say that the ritual that we have today was not influenced by some of these philosophies.
Well, and if you look at Masonry coming out of Enlightenment thinking and this return to Hermeticism and Enlightenment philosophy, it makes complete sense that these mystical schools of the Kabbalah and Hermeticism would be drawn upon as a lot of source material behind the tenets of the Masonic fraternity.
Now, I know that Brother Kirk McNulty, who's written a couple books on the topic, he basically has said right out that he believes that the Age of Enlightenment, the result of that was an enlightenment from the Hermetic Kabbalah. What do you think about that?
That just to understand, so what he's saying is that it was driven by Hermetic Kabbalah, or was an enlightenment they were moving away from Kabbalah?
No, I think it was the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, was influenced by, and people were starting to express interest in the Kabbalah as applied from a Hermetic sense. That the output of the Age of Enlightenment was a deeper understanding of reason and knowledge from the Hermetic Kabbalah perspective.
Yeah, I would say that he's got a pretty decent argument there, and the reason I say that is because it's a very small step from Kabbalah to deism, right? Because what Kabbalah talks about is like God as a system, right? God as the systemic being that is governed by rules and tendencies and influences and things like that. So when you look at the Tree of Life and you look at something like, like Netzach, or you look at Bina, or you look at Chokhmah, right? Those are our aspects of the divine that are somewhat rule-based, and they're somewhat predictable. You can understand them, right? And so for Enlightenment thinkers who wanted to think of God as this cosmic watchmaker, that must have been very comforting to them, because up until this point, God was this sort of wrathful, this sort of character that would kind of take it out on you, and if you weren't born into the right church, or you weren't believing the right thing, you were damned to an eternity of hell. And Kabbalah, the way in which Kabbalah sort of conceptualizes the divine, it's really kind of above that. It kind of transcends that aspect of, those are kind of the lower aspects of God, where God is actually intervening on a daily, it's really interesting. There was a really good book written, I think about 15 years ago, called The Disappearance of God. And what you see is, like in the Bible, right, it starts out God is very intimately involved in human affairs, and he's like, he's making Adam and Eve's clothing. He comes over to lunch every couple of days for Abraham, right? He's sending his angels to like grab Abraham's hand and say, yeah, don't do that. He's arguing with Abraham, right? But then as the Bible goes on, right, by the time you get to like King David, right, God is basically whispering to us.
That's true.
Right? And as you get even farther out, God is slowly starting to become less direct and more indirect. And Kabbalah kind of supports that. So I would say that for if you're somebody who is attracted by rationalism and who's attracted by like like none of these guys. What was interesting about the Enlightenment is none of these guys really wanted. I mean, with the exception of maybe Hobbes, none of these guys really were comfortable being atheists. They felt the need to believe in some way, but to believe in a God that sort of that existed and that played by a certain set of rules must have been very comforting to these guys.
Well,
I'm sure there are brothers.
Sorry, go ahead, Juan.
I'm sure there are brothers listening to this, and they can identify with what you're saying, with the fact that even brothers that sit with you in lodge, some of them might have a vision or an understanding, a personal understanding of that God is a God that really intervenes, that can do all these physical things, and next to them could be another brother that has that believes more that God set these rules and these specific things into motion, and it's almost just this figure that just watches from a distance. So it might be enticing for them to explore a little bit more about perhaps in the Kabbalah or different types of systems to try to get a better understanding of what matches their beliefs better.
Yeah, and I think that from the Kabbalistic perspective, the Kabbalah can really accommodate both schools of thought, right? Because God, when you look at like Yesod and Malchut, which are the bottom part of the tree of life, that's really getting very physical and very, very involved. So yes, can God influence human events and influence the world? Sure, absolutely. Kabbalah accommodates for that. But God can also operate at a level that's higher, that's above physical laws. And that's what the higher levels are about.
Well, I think there's something that's very comforting in compartmentalization. Talking about the higher levels of the Kabbalah, and God being less interventionist, if you will. I think it lends itself to a better understanding of, or a better prediction of who God is and what God does on a daily basis as far as working in the lives of people, because you don't have the double-sided aspects of his justice, also his mercy, and will he intervene in this or will he not? When you move toward a more of a deistic philosophy, I think people might gravitate toward that a little bit more because it's just a little bit more reassuring and a little more comforting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. And honestly, like from a Masonic perspective, I think what interests me most about it is not so much about explaining the behavior of God, because that is really a religious question. And the thing is like, Kabbalah is grounded in Judaism, so and I study it from a traditional Jewish perspective, so I'm coming at it from that perspective, as opposed to say a Hermetic perspective or a Christian perspective. But what I find really interesting about it is it's this blueprint for creation. It's understanding the aspects of creation, and as Masonic builders, right? That's really germane to sort of what we're about, is this idea of creation, of building things, right? Of being inspired, of being knowing what to do with that inspiration, right? Having the wisdom and having the know-how to be able to do something, and having that before you actually put pen to paper, right? Being able to, like, so for example, like at the higher level, right? You have Keter, which is the crown, right? Which is the divine inspiration, right? We don't understand it. We can't have any sort of conception of it, but that filters through into Chokhmah, which is knowing what to build, right? That's the wisdom of knowing what to build, and Bina is the understanding of how to get it done, right? And then it flows down into Chesed and Gevurah, right? Which is mercy or loving kindness, right? Which is that need to nurture your creation, right? So, like, think about it. I mean, think about you as an artist, right? When you create something, right? There's this sort of this love that you have to give it to make it kind of real, and then there's a certain part where you have to be critical of it, right? That's the judgment part of it, where you say, you know what, that's the wrong line, I got to erase that, or I got to start over, or I got to kill my we call it killing your little darlings, right? You sometimes you have to do that, right? That's the judgment part of it, right? So there's those two things that are sort of facing off, and when you combine wisdom and know-how and judgment and that sort of loving kindness, right, you get beauty. Right? That's a natural combination of those creative impulses, right? Then from there you have these other impulses, which is Netzach, which is victory, right? And Hod, which is glory. And that's the Netzach is that drive to keep going, right? So, like, this needs more, and then the Hod is knowing when to stop, right? Because, I mean, Juan, you can attribute this, right? Sometimes you overdo it, right? Sometimes you're going to over-design something or over-paint something, right? So all of these things, they flow in a very natural order, and they really sort of explain the creative process, right?
So beautiful, because it makes me think. It makes me think about business. Like, I'm sure that there are brothers from all walks of life that are listening to what you're saying, and they're thinking of how it applies to their lives and how it's different in particular to each one. Like, for example, you have, and I'll go to what I know. I know about art. When I'm in that moment of inspiration, I feel that I am closer to God. That I am actually, at times, I feel as if I am entrusted with a vision, and that could happen to absolutely any one of the 7 point whatever billion people in this planet. But somehow I have been entrusted with that vision. Now, it's up to me from that point to then apply those other aspects of actually caring for that idea, for envisioning it, for making it my own, and actually creating it. Otherwise, it'll be created by somebody else, or a variation of it will be created by somebody else. So, I'm sure that, also that spirit of keeping going, continuing to work on something and knowing when to stop. It's like I say, my paintings are never finished. I just decide when to stop. But I could continue. I could make them more perfect if I wanted to, and I'm sure I spent some time criticizing it, and I'll find a flaw in it. But I have to make a conscious decision of, this is the time that I stop. And I'm sure it's the same for all the other aspects of the brothers that are listening.
One thing that's really striking to me is the idea of balance that just pervades through the entire diagram of the Tree of Life, as you just explained it, Eric. And that dovetails right into a major part of Masonic symbolism, which is the idea of, keeping your passions well balanced. Making sure you divide out your time, according to different areas in a balanced format. The idea of the point within the circle, with in between two parallel lines, talking about needing to balance your passions with your introspection. it's just really neat to see the ways that the philosophy has just kind of given birth to some of the ideas in the ritual.
Yeah, so that was actually a good segue, because I'm looking at again Brother McNulty's paper. I found that, and I'll put that in the show notes, where he goes into a lot of detail here. But basically overlaying the Kabbalah Tree of Life over the pillars and putting in some Masonic symbolism in there. Would you, if you've even thought about it, Eric, talk a little bit about the balance between the pillars and how they could be aligned to the right and left side of the Tree of Life?
Sure. So if you think about the right and left sides of the tree, right? They're very pure in their aspects, right? Whereas the ones in the middle are synthetic, right? They happen because of a interaction between two or more things, right? So when you look at sort of da'at, which is knowledge, right? Knowledge happens between, chokhmah, bina, chesed, and gevurah, right? That leads to knowledge. Chesed and Gevurah and Hod and Netzach together make up beauty, right? And so and harmony, and so those are represented by man, right? Because we are the synthesis of the divine plus the physical, right? So it says that when God created man, right, he made man out of dirt. In fact, the word Adam means earth, and in fact, it's the same root as the word Adon, which means red, like the red clay. And he breathed the breath of life into Adam, giving him the first soul. Now, in Kabbalah, we believe in 5 souls, right? 3 of them exist in our body, and 2 of them exist in the heavens. And that has a lot to do with sort of how we get inspired, etc. But to answer your question, the middle pillar is us, is man. The pillar on the right hand is the pillar of sometimes they call it the pillar of mercy, right? That's the pillar that Chesed comes on. So that's Chokhmah, Chesed, and Netzach. I think it's Netzach. It's either Netzach or Hod. I'm not remembering It's Netzach, yeah. And then on the right side, on the left side, we have Bina, Gevurah, and Hod. And interestingly, it's the right side that's considered masculine, and the left side, which is the more that's called sometimes called the pillar of judgment or the pillar of severity, is the feminine side, right? And together they make the human being, because when in the creation story, and this is kind of an interesting. If you read Genesis is a really fascinating book, but if you read it, there's actually 2 creation stories. In the first creation story, God creates man and woman together, right? So, and in the way the Hebrew reads, it's very interesting. It's like God created man and woman together. Together, He created him, right? Which implies that the male and the female were united into one being, right? And when God creates woman, right, he causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep, and takes a rib from him, and creates Eve. Now, what's interesting is the word for rib and the word for side in Hebrew is the same word. So it's a pun. And what the pun is like he's taking a side from Adam. Well, what side is he taking? Well, he's taking the feminine side, right? And he's separating the feminine from the masculine. So that from a Kabbalistic perspective makes complete sense, right? And so that is the synthesis, right? The feminine side plus the masculine side. And then again, Adam. So there's a concept in Kabbalah called Adam Kadman, which means the primordial man, right? It's that synthetic idea, that idealized man, that is the center of that pillar.
Wow. So yeah, you
There's
have
a
thought
lot
about
of thought
that.
Just a little.
Yeah, my mind just shattered right
So
now.
it never crossed your mind.
Holy crap!
Yeah. Let's see. Let's probably good transition into social media. Jason, I don't know if you want to cover what we've seen on Twitter and Facebook.
Yes, absolutely. Well, starting off, we've had a couple brethren ask if Brother Eric, you would be able to give a little bit of a reading list as far as top 2 or 3 sources that have been very helpful to you in understanding the Kabbalah, or where brethren can go who are interested in knowing a little bit more.
Where do you start?
That's a really good
Exactly.
question. Almost all of my books have been put away. So normally I would just sort of look behind me like this, and I'd be able to tell you. There's a book. I think it's. You know what? There's a book that gives a pretty good sound overview. There's a lot of bad stuff that's written on the Kabbalah, unfortunately, and sometimes like avoiding the bad stuff is as important as finding the good stuff. There is though, and here's what I'll do. I'll find out the name of the book, and in fact, I could probably look it up.
Yeah,
Well, you can give it to us later
notes.
on, and
But
we'll
yeah.
add it to the show notes. I'll be back.
But that's a very good. The book that I'm thinking of is a very good overview of it. The other thing that you could start to do is source material. But one thing that I would advise any serious student of the Kabbalah is to there's a translation of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, called the 5 books of Moses. And what's different about this translation is that what the guy who translated it translated not just the meaning of the Hebrew, but he translated the cadence and the literal meaning of the Hebrew, because the Hebrew words actually have their puns inside things. There's like a rhythm to the poetry that has meaning to it, and without getting into the actual Hebrew, if you don't speak Hebrew, that's the closest thing. It's probably one of the better translations that I've seen of the Hebrew, so that you can get a sense of the language. So you start to see some of these, how the words actually sort of fall off the tongue.
Cool.
So that would be one book that I would recommend. Daniel Matt has been translating the Zohar, which is sort of the granddaddy of all Kabbalistic works. It's probably going to wind up being about 20 volumes. I think he's published about 9 of them so far. This is a really it's an amazing effort that's being funded by the Pritzker family, which is a wealthy Jewish family in the United States, and they've basically funded him to do nothing but translate this work, and it's very, very good. It's very scholarly. The translations itself are very good, and you can learn a lot from it. But I have to warn you, the Zohar itself it's very obtuse, and you really have to have a pretty good understanding, a pretty good grounding in Torah and in Talmud for this stuff to kind of make sense. There's a lot of when you kind of first look into it, because it's basically told in a novel format, right? It's the story of these rabbis, and they walk around and they have these conversations, and that's how all of this stuff gets revealed, and every single line is alludes to this text or that text, and basically I've been studying it for many years, and I'm going through Matt's version now. And it's taken me about a year to get through the first volume, just in chasing down some of these references, and so when they refer to this passage or that passage, going back and actually reading it in the Hebrew, trying to translate it, seeing if there are puns involved or there are hidden meanings and stuff like that, and it's a very interesting course of study.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to getting a couple other references from you later on.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, what else do we have?
All right, so from Brother Donnie Dillon, he had a question for you about the Ein Sof. He says, he doesn't necessarily believe in an interventionist God, but Ein Sof is very appealing. He'd love to hear Brother Diamond's thoughts on that.
So Ein Sof, right? Literally means.
Yeah, I butchered it.
No, it's okay. My job as a Mason, this is my calling in life, is to teach correct Hebrew pronunciation. That's what happens when you're the only Jew in the room. That's kind of what happens. So the Ein Sof is literally means without end. So the word Ein means without or lacking, and Sof means end. And what that is the pure form of God that was swirling around. So when we talk about in the beginning there was darkness, right, and swirling darkness, right, and what happened was that the universe was basically all God, and in order for creation to happen, right, God had to make space for creation. So in the scripture it says, and the Spirit of God moved across the water, right? Now, in Kabbalistic terms, what we call that is the contraction, or tzimtzum in Hebrew. And basically what God does is he creates this space for creation to take place. He lessens himself voluntarily, right? And when you think about it, that's a key aspect. And I'm going to say this, and Juan's going to start nodding his head. This is a key aspect of the creative process, right? Because in order to be able to create, you have to give space for creation. You have to clear your mind a little bit. You have to open it up, and you have to give creation a chance to take place and take hold, right? That's the idea of tzimtzum, right? You have to let go of some of your notions. You have to make that space. So that's what God does. God makes this space for creation, right? And then from there, right, God says, "Let there be light," and there's a singular point. There's a singularity that occurs, right? And from that singularity to the outside of the tzimtzum there's this thing called a kav, which means ray. There's a ray of light that occurs, which is interesting because that's exactly how lightning strikes, right? Lightning doesn't strike from the top down. It doesn't strike from the bottom up. It comes both places and meets in the middle. That's exactly what the Kabbalah said happened with the light. So one of the things I find really interesting is if you look at modern physics, like particle physics and quantum physics, and you look at some of the things that we know about how electricity behaves, the metaphors that the Kabbalists made very, very closely mapped to this they had no idea what they were, to them this is metaphorical, but it does describe physical phenomenon. So that's kind of the role of the Ein Sof. So the Ein Sof is still out there swirling, and it's this part of God that we can never ever know. We can never ever experience. It's just everything and nothing, right?
Wow.
Would you say that there is in there a lesson for us as individuals, that even God had to find a moment and create a space within which he could create the universe? In other words, he had to really open up in a space that removed every superfluity from it to allow this pure creation to happen. Yes. Because for me, I'll tell you that for me, it was my shower and my car as I drove. This is before podcasting and before I had all these gadgets that surrounded me, and I noticed that I had not been as creative as I once was, because I had allowed those two spaces to be invaded by stimulus. I used to have nothing in my shower other than my shampoo and my soap, and I had the kind of crayons that you have for kids to write on the walls of the shower, and that's where I would come with my inspirations to make my paintings. I would sketch on the walls of my shower because I had no other stimulus. There was nothing else to distract me. I had a pure place to create.
Mm-hmm. All right,
All
Jason,
right.
what else?
Back to social media. We had a question from Scott Sherman, which I think is really, really interesting. He's curious, being Jewish himself, how a mystic way invented by those who adhere to Judaism with strict laws to study it. He's interested how that way is suddenly so popular among both Christians and other non-Jews just looking for more light and mysticism.
Wow, that's a really good question. So, at the time, right about the time that Christianity emerged from Judaism, Kabbalah was kind of in full swing. Like it was like the beginnings of it, right? The beginnings of that kind of mysticism. And historically, I would say that the because of its Neoplatonic bent, it's sort of delving into metaphysics. The Christian intellectuals in the Middle Ages, as works like the Zohar were being written, Christian intellectuals were taking this stuff, and there was this really big effort to convert the Jews, because until you convert the Jews, right, Jesus can't really come back, and I mean all these things have to happen. So they would look at scripture like the Kabbalah, and what they saw in it was pointers to Jesus. So in the Christian worldview, like the role of the Old Testament, right, is to point to the coming of Christ, and so that's how it's generally interpreted. Mm-hmm. And so what they did was they used the Kabbalah as a way to sort of reinforce the ideas in Christianity, to reinforce, and from that sort of Christian Kabbalah, you get some of these traditions like Rosicrucianism and Martinism and things like that. And then later on, from a Hermetic standpoint, that evolved mostly from the Ma'aseh Shemot, so the names, right? Those were at the time in the Middle Ages were considered very powerful amulets. They were written. So in Judaism, we have this idea called it's called stam, which so when you write a Torah, the rules for writing a Torah are very, very, very strict, and you have to write it letter for letter. And if you make a mistake that you can't correct by scraping the ink off, you have to completely start over. So to write a Torah is a very, very time-consuming, very difficult, requires a special kind of scribe using special tools, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, just to buy like a single Torah scroll is like $30,000, $40,000. It's yeah.
Wow.
And that text, that because it's written on parchment, it's written on sheet parchment with a special kind of ink, it's considered living. It's considered like a living thing, right? And so when a Torah, and there are other kinds of writing that are written in the same way. So a mezuzah that you place on your door frame also has the same characteristics. It's written on parchment by a sofer or a scribe in this way, and that text is considered living text. So you can't destroy it, right? You have to bury it. You have to give it a funeral. So there are these things called genizas, which are like think of it as like a funeral home for these Jewish texts, right? And these amulets actually, when they were written as stam, they were written on parchment with this in this way, were considered extremely powerful, not just by Jews but by non-Jews alike. And so that there was this transference of fascination around these guys who were making these like really, really powerful amulets, and so that kind of evolved from there into the Hermetic Kabbalah, right? Because they were using it as ways. There's also what's called mazel in Kabbalah, which is astrology, right? So that's kind of connected also, and there are works on astrology that are connected to the Kabbalah, and so a lot of that literature just kind of naturally merged as the Hermeticists were looking for source material. And remember, if you're a Hermeticist, older is better, right? So they were looking at Greek source material. and they were looking at some of this Jewish source material as well, and so they were able to pull some of this stuff out that they thought was germane to what they were doing, and so that's how you kind of get these different kinds of Kabbalah.
Okay, Jason, let's do
Yep,
one more.
We're running a little bit short on time, so one more question will probably do us. Here's something interesting from Brother Eric Tamez, getting back to Masonry and esoterics in general. Why is it that many of us Masons don't even realize that there are connections between the Kabbalah and Freemasonry's rituals?
Good question.
I alluded to this a little bit actually in our last episode on Ask Us Anything. So I'm interested to hear what Brother Diamond has to say about it.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think that I don't think everybody should necessarily know about it. I think that Kabbalah is one of those things that you really have to discover it. You really get insight from it when you think about it and you learn it, and it's not something that comes easy. So I don't know that I don't know to what extent Masonry is informed by Kabbalah. I'm sure it had some sort of influence. I think what's interesting now for me is to take the symbols of Freemasonry and the lessons of Freemasonry and what I know about Kabbalah and sort of see if I can synthesize the two. And in fact, that's something that I'm working on creating as kind of like an ongoing sort of Masonic mystery school. So that's kind of in development now. But because I think that there are parallels and it is interesting. But I don't know that I would expect Kabbalah to be that much a part of Masonry that it would be taught as part of, because I think the Masonic system of morals and symbols and things like that, I think it stands on its own. It doesn't require Kabbalah to be what it is and to be useful for people. I think Kabbalah is a tool. It's just like the tree of life is this like metaphor and this overlay. I think that Kabbalah is this metaphor and overlay that we can overlay upon Masonry to give it more insight and more depth and more flavor and more color, but it's not required. It's not a foundational aspect of Freemasonry, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it goes back to a little bit talking about the generational differences between Masons from the post World War II era to now, where the millennials are coming in. And it's a renewed interest in all things mystic. And so there are more Masons coming into the fraternity now who are actively researching these ancient mystical schools and trying to overlay those concepts onto what they know about the tenets of Freemasonry and seeing where they can compare and contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point, and when you study Kabbalah, and we were kind of talking about this before we went live, they're very strict about who they teach it to and under what conditions, and so they realize that Kabbalah is very, mysticism in general is very heady stuff, and that you can read lots of stories about people who just sort of lose it. They lose themselves in mysticism and they get a little nutty around it, and so they wanted to make sure that people who took this on as a study were properly grounded. So they made rules like you have to be 40. You have to have children. You have to have, you've got to be married. You have to be learned in Talmud and Torah and a righteous person, because they realized that they wanted, they didn't want you to go off into the desert and never come back. Like they wanted to make sure you were grounded in the here and now. And then the other thing was that they always start out, when they teach you Kabbalah, they always start out by telling you the story of 4 rabbis who enter the garden, and the garden is sort of a metaphor for wisdom and the Kabbalah. And the first rabbi who enters sees the glorious throne of God, and he just instantly dies, right? And of it is there's a passage that says, God weeps for his lost ones. And then the second rabbi sees it, and he just goes completely insane, right? And what the scripture says of him is yes, you found honey, but only eat as much as you need, lest you vomit it. And then the third one, was a rabbi by the name of Acher, which means the other one. In fact, he was so hated that they couldn't even say his real name. They just called him the other one, because he got this wisdom, and instead of it informing his life, he used it to corrupt the young. He became abusive and, like kind of like a cult leader. And because once you have that kind of wisdom, it can be very heady. You have a lot of influence over people, and he used it incorrectly. Only the fourth guy, Rabbi Akiva, entered in peace and left in peace, because he didn't go into it with expectations. He just sort of took it as it came, and then because he was properly grounded, he was able to kind of return back to the here and now. That's the caution that I would leave people who are looking to study esoterics and Masonry with, is that it's very easy to lose yourself in it, and to not really focus on what the lessons of Masonry really teach us, and to get so caught up in the esoterics of it that you kind of lose sight of like why you join the fraternity and what the brotherhood teaches us about how to conduct our lives on a day-to-day basis. So that's just the sort of the cautionary tale that as we're out there, collecting lapel pins and joining invitational bodies and things like that, we should really keep that in mind, that it's really about those first 3 degrees.
Awesome.
Preach it. All
right. All right, on that note, let's start wrapping up for tonight. I will hand it over to Juan for his final thoughts and shameless plugs.
Well, clearly I find this topic fascinating. I think there's a lot to be learned from it, but before then, there's a lot of preceding material that we can spend our time learning, just like Brother Eric said. Focus on those 3 degrees first before you start trying to complicate things for yourself. And if you think about it this way, it doesn't mean that you can't handle what's available beyond the 3 degrees. The risk is if you come across these things too soon, you might not give them the opportunity to be as fruitful in your life as they could be. You still have some foundational work to do to lay the ground for those things to really take root. So, Brother Eric, thank you very much for being with us tonight. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you join us again some other time. And I want to encourage brothers to participate. If there's anything we didn't discuss on the show notes or on social media, go right ahead and let us know what you think. You post questions there. Brother Eric hangs out in our Facebook pages, and he's in contact with us, so he'll probably continue to spread some wisdom there. Brother Joseph Wage is the editor of the latest book, The Secret School of Wisdom. He's going to be on the Winding Stairs this Friday night. It's going to be at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to get more details, go to thewindingstairs.com. But we're going to be talking about this book where he talks about the Order of the Illuminati. There's a ton of misinformation out there about what this organization was about. People claim all kinds of things. We're going to try to dispel as much of it as we can within the time that we have allotted, but we want you to join us live. So for more information on that, find us on thewindingstairs.com, or if you're on Facebook, go to the Winding Stairs Freemasonry group, and we have links there to the event, as well as an opportunity for you to get a free copy of the book. So head on there today if you can. Thank you, brothers.
Excellent. Thank you, Juan. Jason.
Yeah, quick one note about Brother Joe Wages. We actually had him on last summer during our episode on the Illuminati, so check that out, and then go to the Winding Stairs Facebook page, because back when we had him on, his book hadn't come out yet, and now it's been a long period of anticipation, but it's now out, and it's really, really exciting, so you guys will want to check that out Friday night. Getting back to the topic at hand of mysticism and Kabbalah and Masonry, and whether or not the two are related, I think it's easy to see that Enlightenment thinking definitely had an influence on Masonry, but again, we can't prove a lot of this. So it's up to your own individual interpretation, and as is, your entire Masonic experience, it's yours and yours alone to make of it what you will. But I think one of the I think that the story that Eric told about the four rabbis is paramount to your experience in Masonry, in the sense that you can't lose yourself in the fraternity. This is one facet of your life, and remember, Masonry is about balance. There are a lot of elements of balance in the Kabbalah, so just make sure that you're taking a balanced approach to whatever you do. And that's something I've been preaching ever since we've had the show. So thank you so much for everybody who is spending that part of their Masonic quota of their life with us every week, hanging out with us on the show. We really appreciate it. Brother Diamond, you just completely blew my mind tonight on several different occasions, and this is coming from a person who joined the fraternity for the fraternal aspect of it, and most certainly not any of the mystical implications. So it's really, really neat to begin to draw some of these parallels between Enlightenment philosophy and their place, or not, in the ritual, depending on how you look at it. So thank you so much. Please come back and see us on the show again, because it's been great. With that, check out my blog, 2 Foot Ruler, Masonry in Plain Language, right there. I'm also a regular contributor for the Midnight Freemasons. I'll have a new article up there soon. And with that, I'll send it back to you guys.
Okay. Eric, we'll give you a chance to wrap things up and plug your show.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys for having me. I had a really, really good time, and I love talking about this kind of stuff. The reason that I started X-Oriente was because of the kinds of conversations that I would have at Masonic Week, and these incredibly rich conversations that we're now able to do on the internet. So I want to thank you for that opportunity. And now for the shameless plug part, X-Oriente, the Masonic podcast, at www.xoriente.com. Would love to see you there. We're doing a series on Enlightenment thinking, so this kind of dovetails into what Jason was talking about. And thank you for having me. And go to Lodge. Go to Lodge. Go
Nice.
to Lodge. Everybody, if you're listening to my voice, go to Lodge.
Even if you're not a Mason, go to Lodge.
That's right. Go to Lodge.
Go to Lodge.
Just go to Lodge.
Good advice.
That is.
Excellent. Hey, again, thank you very much, Eric Diamond, for joining us tonight. I was a long-time listener to your podcast, and I'm honored to have met you in person at Masonic Week, and also to have you on the show for this very special episode. Your wealth of knowledge, and like Jason, there was a couple moments where I think my head exploded. So thank you for that. Now, just want to remind everyone that we are doing this, out of our own pockets. So if you want to donate to the show, make sure you go to the MasonicRoundtable.com, and you can give us a $10 donation, and we'll give you a pin. So we have a few pins left. More are coming. Stay tuned. But
they're different.
But they may be different. They are different. Okay. So there's that. But
they're the same and different at the same time.
Now that way to be an enigma wrapped in a riddle, Jason.
Esoterics, come on, man.
Right, of course. What are the show? But that would help us keep the lights on, so thank you for that. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and when you consider all of the esoterics that are involved with Freemasonry, I'm fascinated by them. But as we said in the Ask Me Anything, I dabble. I pick and choose a little bit from like a Chinese menu of the influences that come with alchemy, with Kabbalah, with these other traditions, and I think they're all fascinating because they culminate into a nice system of which I think the fraternity has leveraged a lot from. So do your homework, read up. We'll get a list of the text that Eric was talking about earlier. We'll put that on the show notes. And other than that, thanks for watching and keep searching for more light. Have a good night.